Greetings, friends, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Rob Breckenridge. Thank you so much for joining us here this week. A couple of interesting issues we're going to delve into in this episode of the podcast. Later on, we'll talk about gasoline prices, gasoline taxes, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation out with its annual gas tax honesty report. We'll talk about what's been going on specifically in Alberta and the controversy over the Alberta government's reversal on their gas tax policy. The federal government with a big decision to make in the weeks ahead. They, of course, paused the federal excise tax, but that is set to be unpaused in the weeks ahead. What should Ottawa do with that? We'll get into all of that coming up shortly with Kris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I want to begin the episode, though, with the controversy that unfolded this week in Edmonton, which I think is part of a more broad national conversation around hate and hate speech. And we've certainly been seeing examples across the country recently, for example, in Toronto, really troubling examples of hate-motivated crime. And this is a reality that police forces across the country are dealing with. So yes, hate-motivated crime is an issue. And there was also a criminal threshold when it comes to hate speech. And this video that was posted by the Edmonton Police Service this week sort of raises that question then, where is that line? When and where do police need to get involved on this issue? And if we're not talking about criminal behavior, is it really something that police should be concerning themselves with? So this all stemmed from a video that was posted on social media by Edmonton Police Service, talking about hate and urging people to report hate. But the examples provided in the video, these sort of random social media comments, were all clearly things that were not at all criminal in nature, which sort of sparked that debate then. If these are not criminal comments, if this is not something that police would investigate and lay charges, why are police concerning themselves with this? Why are they urging citizens to report things that are not criminal? Police have more than enough to deal with these days, including actual hate crimes, but of course, including all other sorts of crimes. So the backlash to this prompted a response from the Alberta government. First, it was Alberta's public safety minister, reiterating that they believe that police priorities should be actual crimes. And Public Safety Minister Mike Ellis making it clear that he would let police forces know that this is not something that should be a priority for them right now. That was reiterated in a social media post from Premier Danielle Smith, who spoke about the importance of respecting freedom of expression. And again, urging police not to be in the business of policing opinions or policing online comments. That was also reiterated in these comments from the Premier that she shared on her social media in an interview she did this week, talking about Alberta's approach to this.
I can tell you our approach in Alberta is that the federal government does have the power of criminal law.
Yeah.
We have the power of non-enforcement. And what that means is we choose our policing priorities and we choose our Crown prosecution priorities. And I can tell you, if the intention behind it is to do what we're seeing in the UK, where regular citizens are getting hauled off to prison because they post something online that hurts someone's feelings, we are just not enforcing that. There's no way that's not the culture in Alberta. We reaffirmed in our Alberta Bill of Rights that free speech is protected, and we just don't. We think that's a government overreach. The worry I have about how this may, so that's how I think private citizens should be looking at that, is just look at what's happening in other jurisdictions. And we've got to draw a line saying that we have to be able to toughen up. Like there are areas of criminal law where you legitimately cannot say things that subject another group to hatred or violence. Mm-hmm. That's a very high bar, and it should be a high bar. But hurt feelings laws, you can't police them.
Okay, so look, it's not a conflict to believe in the principle of free speech or believe in the idea that we should protect free expression while still opposing hate speech and being opposed to hatred or hate crimes more broadly. So I think the Edmonton Police Service has overstepped its bounds here, and I think there is a correction needed. So I think the point being laid out by the Alberta government in this context makes sense. So what are the civil liberties implications here of police going down this path, of having citizens report non-criminal behavior or have police forces spend time gathering or even investigating non-criminal behavior? Well, this is something that's certainly of concern to the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Joining us for more on this controversy and some of the broader issues this speaks to. Very pleased to welcome to the program here this week Josh Dehaas. He's litigation director of the Canadian Constitution Foundation, much more at theccf.ca. Josh, great to have you with us here.
Thanks for the invitation.
So it was a video that was posted and deleted by Edmonton police that kind of sparked this whole controversy. But there seems like there's a lot more going on here. What stood out to you, first of all?
Yeah, so this video, and for those who haven't seen it, it's essentially showing a bunch of what looks like mean tweets or posts that you might see on social media, referencing things like bad drivers or calling for deportations. And what stood out to me is that every single bit of language that the Edmonton police are suggesting here is hateful, is protected expression, and not illegal. Not criminal hate speech. These are things that people might find hurtful or they might be offended by, or they might even be discriminatory, in a workplace or something like that. But they're not criminal hate speech. And so I was shocked to see the Edmonton police essentially implying that they are.
It was interesting. Even though that video got deleted, there was still a web page that the Edmonton Police Service had that talked about hate crimes and even specifically acknowledged the idea that hate incidents may be things that don't meet that threshold of being criminal. And they talked about offensive jokes or slurs or comments or insults, the kinds of things you're talking about here. So if the police are even conceding that a lot of this is not criminal, why are they making it their concern, do you think?
Well, they shouldn't be, but the reason I think they're making it their concern is that, well, first of all, there's federal funding for this type of project where you collect statistics on what are called non-crime hate incidents, and we're seeing this in Ontario, and I think this is the first time I've seen it actually outside of Ontario. But police face a lot of pressure to respond to incidents that people find offensive or hurtful, and their job, I think, is to be compassionate, but explain to people that this is not crime and that their job is to enforce the Criminal Code of Canada and keep the peace, so they can't do anything about it. But instead, they've decided, some of these police forces, that they're going to start launching these public campaigns and start collecting these reports of offensive speech that people see online. And it's really disturbing to me. It's a pretty slippery slope when police are collecting information about people who are alleged to be, bad people, when they are not actually doing anything that's criminal.
I mean, it seems like such a burden, just beyond anything else. The idea that you're going to take calls about mean tweets, and who knows, there may be anonymous accounts that are outside the city or outside the province or outside of the country. That's a lot of police resources potentially being devoted to policing and investigating. Again, as you say, matters that probably aren't even criminal in the first place. At a time when police are really challenged when it comes to resources, does that seem like an ideal use of those resources?
Well, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, I've learned over the past few days, that's not a good use of police resources. I mean, we have seen an uptick in actual crimes. Jewish businesses, for example, that have been shot
Yeah.
at, or schools that have been shot at. The embassy, or the Iranian embassy or consulate here in Toronto, same thing. And those types of investigations that are looking into real crime, they take a lot of time, a lot of police resources, and so it's very strange to think that even if your goal is to push back against some of this hate that we're seeing, which is a laudable goal, that you would put any resources at all into collecting these, non-crime hate incident reports.
Well, that's the thing too, right? I mean, there is a genuine threshold when it comes to hate crimes or hate motivated crimes, which, as we've seen, can involve vandalism, property crimes, even violence. That's all genuinely the purview of police. But what's the impact then if we just start to water it down to the point where we're just lumping everything in that basket and calling it hate?
Well, the problem is that it's just such a slippery slope, and it chills people's free speech about legitimate conversations. The Supreme Court's been very clear that offensive speech is protected, and it's only where speech reaches a certain threshold, and it's quite a high bar, where it's the most extreme vilification and detestation that can have certain harmful effects that are severe enough that we can actually limit speech. And we don't limit all of that other stuff that is just merely offensive because, one person's offensive speech is another person's political argument. And maybe it's an inelegant argument, but we do need to be able to talk about controversial things. And that's why we have free speech, is so that in a democracy we can have these debates, even when they're, sometimes emotional, or sometimes people feel hurt or offended by hearing those arguments. It's still important that in a democracy we can say these things, and we don't have to fear that the police will show up and knock on our door like they do pretty regularly now in England because of these non-crime
Right.
um, expressions.
Well, and that's the slippery slope you talk about, and the threat to civil liberties. I mean, in a perfect world, sure, we wouldn't have ignorant or bigoted or racist people or those kinds of comments on social media. But what is the impact on civil liberties if people are being investigated, potentially even arrested or charged by police for comments that even as police acknowledge are not criminal in nature?
Well, the risk of being charged for these types of comments is pretty low, and that's good. But the problem is that when people see this campaign, they start to believe that those types of comments are illegal, and that will chill good faith people who want to, speak, who don't know exactly where that line is between what's legal speech and what's illegal hate speech. And so when you start blurring that line and you start saying that all of this speech is not just unacceptable from, a social point of view, from, something your neighbor shouldn't say to actually something that can land you in jail, we end up not being able to have difficult conversations. Just to use one example, some of the tweets relate to immigration. Well, we need to be able to talk about immigration, even if that sometimes is harsh or difficult or offensive to certain people. And if they see these tweets, a lot of people will start thinking, "Well, I'm not allowed to talk about that at all." And then there's the bad faith people who will use this to turn themselves into martyrs, right? If they say, "Well, I can't make this argument anymore, and I can't make that argument," that can sort of explode in a very bad way too. So best to let people speak, and if they see something that they find offensive, they should just push back and say, I think that comment's unacceptable, and here's why. They shouldn't be reporting through an online forum to a government agency that carries guns.
Right. It's interesting because, typically we don't want governments telling the police what to do, but obviously, governments do make and pass laws. Governments can set policing priorities. What did you make of the response? First, it was Alberta's public safety minister who said, look, this should not be a priority. That the premier stepped in and kind of reinforced that we need to focus police efforts on actual crimes and we should not be policing people's opinions. What did you make of that?
I think that was exactly right. And I'm really happy to see politicians step in and defend free speech, because usually we see the opposite. Governments are elected by the people, and the people decide what the priorities are. And I think that if you surveyed people honestly, their priority would be, those violent crimes or property crimes, rather than trying to get people not to say mean things on the internet.
You pointed to some communities in Ontario that have implemented similar kinds of approaches, and maybe that's flown under the radar a little bit. Is there a silver lining in this controversy here that it's prompted such a reaction? It's prompted a conversation, and maybe it's an opportunity to get in front of this before we go further down that slippery slope.
Yeah, I think it is. Like I mentioned, all of these programs have one thing in common, and that's that they've received federal funding. So there's going to continue to be pressure on police forces to undertake these programs, simply because there's money available to do it, right? So here in Ontario, there were several police forces that we learned all at once had started these online reporting forums and these programs to encourage people to report non-criminal speech to police, including offensive jokes or mean comments. And what we've seen in Ontario here, we actually did some freedom of information requests trying to get information, and it sounds like there haven't been too many reports. So that's sort of the silver lining on this so far. But yeah, we hope that police see what happened in Edmonton and reevaluate and put some time into looking at where is that line between offensive speech and criminal hate speech. And if they want to push back against criminal hate speech, that's perfectly within their purview, but they need to be careful before they roll out programs like this that are confusing the public and chilling freedom of speech.
Yeah, no one should be calling the police over an offensive joke, and that's not a call the police should be taking. Then is that a simple enough principle we can try to
Exactly.
abide by?
Exactly. Exactly.
Is any of this a byproduct, though? We are seeing an expansion of hate laws. We spoke recently, I guess it was Bill C9 was the Combating Hate Act. Is there any connection here? Are we still getting to a point where we're expanding the definition, though, of what a hate crime is?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So, a lot of people think that this is connected to Bill C9, and it may be tangentially. What Bill C9 did was a number of things, and one of them was to create a standalone hate offense. So,
Right.
this means that if you committed or you're accused of committing another crime, let's say you're accused of uttering a threat against a person, and it's a real threat, you mean to go and actually hurt that person, and you're also doing it in a way where you're expressing hate, and that would need to meet the criminal definition of hate. You could be charged with this new offense as well, whereas before it was just after the fact, sort of considered at sentencing. So, what's interesting is the law, and this was as a result of advocacy by the Canadian Constitution Foundation and a handful of others. This law uses the definition from case law of hate, and it's an emotion involving extreme manifestations of detestation and vilification. So you'd still need to meet that threshold of hate. So to use some examples from Edmonton's Post, they're talking about bad drivers being associated with a certain ethnicity. I mean, that's offensive, but it certainly does not meet that definition of hate. So C9 did a couple other things. It took away a defense of good faith religious speech. It created a new offense related to obstructing, religious buildings, things like that. But it's not directly related to what we're seeing here from Edmonton. This looks like, their own initiative.
All right, we'll see where this all goes from here. Much more, as mentioned, the ccf.ca. Josh, appreciate the overview of this and the insight. Thanks so much for joining us here.
Thanks, Rob.
All right, once again, that's Josh Dehaas. He is litigation director of the Canadian Constitution Foundation, or their website, theccf.ca. A little bit of a plug here as well. I wrote a piece for the National Post about all of this in Friday's print edition. You can find it at nationalpost.com. So we'll see what the fallout is from this, both in terms of how the Alberta government maybe pushes police forces in a certain direction, at least when it comes to priorities, and what we see elsewhere in the country, because I think, as Josh spoke to, it's not just an Edmonton issue. All right, moving on to another issue that I think is certainly national in scope. There's some Alberta specific issues to this conversation, but a big question too for the federal government, and that concerns gasoline prices, or more specifically, gasoline taxes. It's been an interesting summer driving season thus far, as we've seen some real fluctuations in the price of gasoline. Because, of course, the price of oil has been elevated. It's bounced around a bit, a lot of it linked to the conflict in the Middle East, the conflict between the US and Iran. And when things flare up, we see the price of oil spike. When things seem to be calming down, we see the price of oil come back down. And that's reflected in what we're paying at the pump in terms of gasoline prices. Now, of course, there's just the summer demand, there's the switch to summer fuels and how that affects refineries and the price of gasoline. There are other things that go into that. But of course, a big factor in the price of gasoline taxes. Now, recently in Alberta, the Alberta government sparked some controversy by deciding not to lower the gasoline tax in response to higher oil prices. And that's the legislated formula that exists right now. Instead, the Alberta government opted for $100 rebates, which were difficult to apply for and sort of flew in the face of the principle that the government had established when it came to lowering the gas tax in the face of higher gasoline prices. So that hasn't gone over well. And we'll see what the Alberta government decides to do in their next quarterly review. As for the federal government, responding to concerns about affordability and a lot of pressure from the opposition Conservatives, the Carney government decided that they would pause the 10 cents a liter gasoline excise tax over the course of the summer. Now, there's still other federal taxes that are being collected, but it was at least a bit of savings at the pump. Sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle, of course, as the price of gasoline goes up and down, but that's there. Those are actual savings that are there. But of course, it was a pause It was not a permanent cut. It was a pause in the gasoline tax. And so that is soon to be unpaused, which is the downside of this kind of an approach. You might get some political payoff when you announce the pause. There's going to be some grumbling and frustration when you bring it back. But when's the right time to do so? Well, there's a new poll out in conjunction with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation showing that Canadians don't want this brought back just yet. Ontario Premier Doug Ford coming out Friday morning, urging the federal government to hold off on reinstating this tax. I think that's part of the message that the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is trying to get across with this poll, and also their latest annual gas tax honesty report, which came out this week, looking at what goes into the price of gasoline provincially right across the country, how much we're paying in taxes, and how governments should manage these issues now moving forward. As mentioned, big decision for the Alberta government coming up and for the federal government too. Joining us for more is Kris Sims, Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, taxpayer.com. Kris, great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
A lot to get into, a lot of news on this front, but let's just kind of start with the overview, the gas tax honesty report, just laying out for motorists how much we pay in taxes. What's the situation for Alberta this year?
Yeah, so every single year since we first started back in the 1990s, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation does a deep dive report into what exactly we're putting in our tanks when it comes to taxes for both gasoline and diesel. Now, it started way back when. You probably remember the days where we started asking questions like, hey, is this taxes going into actually maintaining roads and bridges, or are you just pocketing it and wasting it, big government? So it started there, and now we can do a breakdown like you see behind me, where it's provincial taxes, federal taxes, sales taxes, in some cases across Canada, transit taxes or municipal level taxes on fuel. Here in Alberta, we're not the best. We're not too bad, but we're not the best. As of right now, last I checked on the chart, we're just above Manitoba when it comes to the lowest fuel taxes in all of Canada. So what we would like to see happen is two things. One, provincially, we would like to see Alberta Premier Danielle Smith actually cut that provincial fuel tax. It's 13 cents per liter of gasoline and diesel. We've been paying sky-high prices for barrels of oil while we're at the pumps, as you know, since early March. Most of us, I think, would say, I don't know if you think this is fair, but I'd say that many of us were expecting to see that fuel tax cut happen in July. And then the government came out and said, actually, just kidding, we're going to do a $100 rebate per person instead. And you need to sign up on this government portal and you need to upload all your banking information. I actually heard from a lady at an event in Claresholm saying that because she was at a kind of a credit union co-op situation, they wanted her to upload a selfie. It was quite complicated. So we think provincially, I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think they tried something. I think they wanted to do a rebate benefit of the doubt because they thought it would go to more people, but that isn't what we're hearing. So we're saying, guys, go back to the drawing board, give us that fuel tax cut. And the news stuff that you mentioned off the top there is that we're calling on Prime Minister Mark Carney federally to keep that 10-cent per liter excise tax off because it's not there right now. And people are saving real money. And just fascinating that we now see Ontario Premier Doug Ford jumping on the bandwagon and pushing for Carney to do just that, of keep that excise tax off. So two things. Provincially, we would like to see them go back to basics and actually drop that fuel tax like they said they were going to do. And federally, we would like to see Carney continue to do the right thing and keep that excise tax off there.
Yeah, a couple of things. Let's talk a bit more about Alberta because the law remains in place. It's a formula linked to the price of oil that will either, depending on the situation, reduce that excise tax or pause it altogether. And so even though they opted for the rebate this time around, there's still the potential as we move along this year, depending what happens with oil prices, that law could trigger a drop in the gasoline tax. But this idea of it fluctuating or being temporary, is that part of the issue here? Do we need something more permanent, more lasting in place?
We would just like it to be gone. I mean, if you ask the Taxpayers Federation, we want a much smaller government that gets involved in people's lives much less. I think it was Grover Norquist who said he wants government to be small enough that he can drown it in the bathtub. I like to say teacup because that's a little bit less violent imagery. But the point is that if you do a breakdown, on average, nearly half of what a working person makes in a year, give or take, is taken by government, various levels of government, either city, provincial, or federal, through fees, levies, taxes, whatever the euphemism you want to make. To put that in a different way, so if it's nearly half of what you make goes to various levels of government, poof, gone. Think of it this way. If you're paid a salary the way most people are every 2 weeks, and it's paid by your employer with all the deductions happening and stuff, and it lands in your bank account, picture that amount of money that you usually get. Almost double it. That's how much government takes from you. It's astonishing. So ask yourself what you could do with that money instead. Could you pay to repair your vehicle? Could you pay to get a scan done if you really wanted to do so here in Alberta? Thank you very much. Could you afford more nutritious food? Could you try to save up for a house? So that's a longer way of saying, ideally, we'd like all of them gone. But right now, in our current context, what we would like to see the Alberta government do is at least stick to its own plan. Right. So we didn't force them to do this, but they went and announced a couple of years ago, hey, look at how the price of a barrel of oil is jumping up. Oh my goodness, this is costing people money. I'm paraphrasing. So they put through a law themselves that said, hey, whenever the price of a barrel of oil goes over $80, $85, or $90 US per barrel, respectively, going up and down, we will either, to your point exactly, Rob, reduce the 13 cent per liter fuel tax, or eliminate it. And even though we would clamor for them to do it sooner, right? Like you give it to us right now, take us to Disneyland. They did have it baked into their law that they reviewed it every fiscal quarter. So, every few months, they would go back to the books and say, okay, how long was it over $80, $85, or $90 US per barrel? Let's do the formula, let's do the equation, and reduce the tax. That seems fair. And it seemed predictable for most people who watch these things, which is, I think, why they got such bad press when they announced the rebate instead. I think most of us who keep an eye on Edmonton were expecting a fuel tax cut and not $100 per person rebate. So to start, we would like to see them go back to their own plan. Start there.
Let's talk about the decision the Prime Minister and his government have to make here. And it was announced as a pause. They paused the federal excise tax, which is meant to be some summer relief, which I suppose is probably welcomed by a lot of people. The problem, though, with pausing the tax means you need to unpause it at a certain point. So there is a tax increase looming here. You alluded to Doug Ford. He's come out and said, look, at least delay this, if not make it permanent. So what's the decision here that confronts the Prime Minister?
So we criticize all politicians equally. We want to see lower taxes, less waste, more accountable government. So I'm prefacing that by saying we have taken Premier Doug Ford to task before, but he's right here. Mm-hmm. He's right here. He has permanently cut his own provincial fuel tax in half. Like there's no stringing it along every few months or anything anymore. He just cut that thing in half, which was the right thing to do. We're glad to see that happen. And he's right. And I'm surprised that he's doing this actually with Carney, because usually he just sings from the same song sheet, I've noticed lately, but credit where it's due. Nice to see this. He's saying, hey guys, people are still fighting to afford basics. Let's at least punt this thing till January. Better yet, get rid of the whole thing altogether. Quite a plainly worded letter that he posted this morning. So we would hope that other premiers would do the same thing. It would be nice, for example, to hear Premier Daniel Smith or next door in Saskatchewan, Premier Scott Moe come out and say, hey, people need to keep these savings going. Let's do that. So nice to see it making news. I think one of the reasons, Rob, that it's making news is because Leger did a poll with the Taxpayers Federation, and more than 60%, like a strong majority of Canadians, say they want to keep this excise tax gone. So it's 10 cents off per liter of gas. That was really interesting. When we removed the undecideds, it was over 70%.
Wow.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised too, because, gas taxes are our thing, but it's hard to tell what the general public thinks. But this was a general public national poll, including, this is fascinating, including amongst women around my age. People who are middle-aged women who typically are carny voters, I will point out, they're the strongest demographic saying keep this tax gone. So I was happy to see that. I'd be curious to know actually what you think, if you don't mind me asking. I don't keep track of the American politics very closely anymore because it's just like trying to drink from a fire hose and it's not Canadian. It doesn't affect us directly. So, but I've noticed online the last couple of days, there must be primaries coming up because they're all getting hot and bothered over the price of a burrito. Don't know if you saw that. Yeah.
Yes.
I actually think, and they're warning Republicans or something of don't lose touch with normal people and, don't scoff at, how much stuff costs. I think this does carry over to Canada. I think sometimes those in Ottawa who are in that strange terrarium of government, the terrarium media, lobbyists, it's their own environment. And I think sometimes they can lose touch with people who care about gas taxes. They care about how much things are costing at the grocery store. So it's nice to see Ford speak up on this. We would love to see other premiers of all stripes. Would look great to see Wab Kinew come out on this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, clearly affordability is still a top concern for Canadians. And I think, the federal government, the prime minister was at least politically astute to realize that. And the Conservatives have been hammering them hard on this issue, calling on them to pause the excise tax. So I think it was smart politics. What's interesting to me about this poll is that Canadians notice. I think maybe why the Alberta government got scared off and maybe why the federal government's prepared to back off is that once you make the announcement, it's maybe not as visible, and the price of oil is going to fluctuate and the price of gasoline is going to fluctuate. And look, that 10-cent savings is still there no matter what. But I do wonder if people sort of forget that it's there, lose sight that it's there. So this poll, I think, to me is a reminder that people know that and appreciate that.
Yeah, for me too. Because, we'll be stuck in like interview loops and stuff like that, right? It's easy to kind of say, oh, well, do people really care about this? In fact, they do. That was so interesting. And if you break it down, 10 cents per liter, just to give people an idea, if you're filling up an average size pickup truck, of which there are many here in Alberta, you're saving $10 every time. Every time. Like, I can get a roast chicken for $10 if I shop carefully. Seriously, that's money. I can more than get a jug of milk. I can almost get a jug of milk and a jar of peanut butter, but peanut butter has gone crazy because of inflation. So it's real cash. And especially if you start working out the math of a 2-car working family that drives quite a bit. I did the math quickly back when they should have just reduced the fuel tax here in Alberta at the beginning of July. And if they had done that, a 2-person working family that drives, quite a bit, like many of us do in Alberta, they would have saved over $375 by the end of September if they had done that instead. But instead, it says $100 per person rebate. People don't really see rebates necessarily. Not everybody knows how to apply for them. I've been getting phone calls from seniors who don't know how to do this. So I think it's a good reminder for everybody that with this poll coming out and saying the vast majority of Canadians want this tax to stay gone, and now we see Premier Doug Ford, biggest province in Canada, coming out and saying, let's keep this gone. It's really powerful. Can I nerd out for a minute here on numbers?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So this wasn't me nerding out. I'm stealing Franco's thunder. So Franco, our federal director, who he worked out the math. So get this. For people who are listening saying, oh, well, can the poor government really afford this to keep the tax off? They're a bunch of paupers. They don't have any money. Franco worked it out. If Carney were keeping to his own budget, so right now he's on track to overspend his own deficit budget. I know that sounds crazy. But if he simply dialed it back a notch so that he's keeping with its own projections, they could afford this. Like, that's the same amount that they would otherwise be taking in this fuel tax. So if he just stuck to his own crazy red ink deficit budget this time, they'd be able to keep that tax cut.
Well, and that kind of partially answers this question because, as you alluded to earlier, there's been at least the alleged link between gas taxes and maintaining roads and transportation networks. I don't know that that link is always clear because, as you pointed out, this does just go into general revenues.
Mhm.
If we reduce or even in some cases eliminate some of these taxes, does that necessarily mean that we're not going to be able to pay for roads or road upkeep?
This is such a great question. The answer is no, because to your point, it goes into general revenue anyway. I think a lot of people are really logical and they like to think that, okay, I'm paying this at the pump, so logically, it's going to go into the roads and bridges bucket of government and only be used for that. We wish it were so. That's not the case. It goes into general revenue, and then the government each budget season just divvies it up based on whatever money is there. And I will point out, interestingly, and I don't know why they did this, Rob. Remember a couple of years ago in the Alberta budget when they put through that tax? I think it was $100 a year or $200 a year on electric vehicles.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
They made this funny statement in the budget where they said, actually, fuel taxes don't go directly to roads and bridges. So that was an interesting admission that they put there in prose. So we know for a fact that doesn't happen. And the shorter answer is especially when you combine things like municipal, provincial, and federal, the government takes so much money and it wastes so much money. It's embarrassing, frankly, how much government wastes. We could do the little stuff like municipally. I don't know if you saw next door to our rectangle people in Saskatchewan. In Saskatoon, they spent $300,000 on 3 big plastic rocks.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Literally, like I'm not exaggerating. They're 3 big plastic rocks, $100,000 a pop. Picture 3 nurses or 3 paramedics or 3 cops being employed in that city instead of 3 big plastic rocks. There's that. Provincially, we'll waste tons of money on corporate welfare, right? Or on a high-speed train that nobody asked for between Edmonton and Calgary with stops along the way every hour. Some of the crazy stuff I'm hearing from Edmonton. And then federally, I mean, now you're into the big leagues. Literally billions of dollars trying to fix their own payroll software, Phoenix Pay System, billions with a B, which is 1,000 million. And they still haven't fixed it. So short answer is they take way too much of your money and then they waste it. So they absolutely could keep a fuel tax off for sure.
Well, we'll see what happens in the weeks ahead. A big decision for Ottawa to make, the Alberta government as well. Much more on all of this, as mentioned, taxpayer.com. Kris, always appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you for caring about this. Appreciate it.
Once again, that was Kris Sims, Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, their website, taxpayer.com. So as she lays out, we'll see what the federal government decides to do with this federal gasoline excise tax, when or whether they bring it back or how they choose to proceed. We shall see. So a big decision looms there. But of course, I mean, the federal government, the prime minister has a lot on his plate these days. They have had some good economic news in recent weeks, some really encouraging growth numbers, GDP numbers from StatsCan just recently, showing that we're on pace for a pretty strong quarter. And some numbers out Friday showing a surprising increase in employment, jobs gains in Canada, even exceeding economists' expectations. So the unemployment rate coming down slightly in the latest batch of numbers for July out Friday from Statistics Canada, which is an interesting contrast to what we've seen in the U.S. with some weaker growth numbers in the U.S. and a surprising loss of jobs in the Friday data out of the United States. So interesting to see those diverging trends right now, especially at such a pivotal moment for Canada-U.S. trading relations. We are less than 2 weeks away from these new U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods taking effect, and whether there's still an opportunity for that to be avoided, and if not, how the government intends on responding. Now, it's hard to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. We're hearing various reports about negotiations or possible progress on certain issues. And obviously, with this U.S. president, it's very unpredictable. So I'm not sure what prompted this comment from Donald Trump this week, but here's what he had to say about Canada and Canada's leaders.
By everybody, by Canada. Canada's nasty. They are. They're nasty. People think Canada, they're nasty. People, I love the people, but they're nasty. Nasty leadership.
Okay, so I'm not sure what exactly he means by nasty or what's nasty about Canada or Canada's government or Canada's leaders or what exactly set him off. Prime Minister Mark Carney, as you might imagine, was asked about, of course, the broader question of where things stand with trade negotiations, but also about that specifically.
Whatever adjective is used, yes, we're standing up for Canadian workers, for Canadian businesses, as we always have from the start. And from the start, our focus has been on what we can control, and that's investing in protecting our jobs, investing in the future, and you see a great demonstration of that here, making carbon neutral aluminum, the first demonstration plant in the world in order to make carbon neutral aluminum. That's a partnership between Rio Tinto, another company, but the government of Quebec and the government of Canada, all working together seamlessly. I was making an analogy in terms of it's hard to distinguish between the firms that from the Saguenay, the electrical firms, the construction firms, other firms that are working seamlessly with the core team from Rio Tinto, and I think that's what we're seeing in this industry and throughout. Last point, which is that you've seen now the start of the transformation in the economy just beginning to show up in the numbers. We're creating jobs at twice the rate of the United States. We have foreign direct investment twice the rate of our nearest G7 competitor, which is the United States. We are seeing growth pick up in this quarter. And most fundamentally, what we're seeing is business investment beginning to pick up, and that's because we've kept focused on what we can control, and the world, we have what the world wants, which includes the greatest workers in the world.
All right. Well, in the meantime, the clock is ticking. August 19th is when these tariffs are supposed to take effect. So we'll see if there's any kind of breakthrough before then. And, you know, again, when it comes to this president, even if there is some kind of deal or agreement, how much faith can you actually put in that? So that's just kind of the reality of what we're dealing with at the moment. We'll see what unfolds over the next couple of weeks here. Listen, that's where we will leave it for this episode of the podcast. Again, thank you so much for joining us. You can find us on the audio podcast platform, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and the rest. You can find our YouTube channel as well, Rob Breckenridge Show, and our website, robbreckenridge.ca. Again, thanks so much for joining us here this week. Have a fantastic weekend, and we will talk to you next week. Take care. Hey, folks, thanks for watching and listening. You can find us at robbreckenridge.ca. Also, make sure you hit that subscribe button below and stay connected with The Rob Breckenridge Show.